Jeremy Snyder, and this is my video about why the bloody hell should we learn a language. I'm an Indonesian teacher in Western Australia, and the most common question that I have from students at school is, why do we even need to learn this anyway? The purpose of students learning a language other than English is for them to connect, understand, and therefore hopefully respect people from cultures outside of the traditional English culture. In a world where globalization is taking over and the world is shrinking, people are connecting, communicating, working with people from a variety of cultures all around the world, this is more important now than it ever has been in the history of Australia. Well, traditional Australians were multicultural, were multilingual. See, before England invaded Australia 350 years ago, there were over 250 different languages spoken across the nation, 250 different cultures in this country that we now call Australia. Back then, each of these Aboriginal nations would communicate with the neighbouring nations, and they would need to necessarily learn the language of their neighbouring nations in order to communicate with them. And this is traditional Australian culture. More than 200 Aboriginal languages were destroyed in a linguistic genocide across the nation. And following this decimation of more than 200 languages and 200 cultures across Australia, monolingualism and monoculturalism became the norm in Australia through the White Australia policy. But that too is now history. Moving forward in the increasingly globalized world, we need to learn languages of our neighbouring nations in the traditional Australian way to communicate with people outside of the English culture, to understand people outside of the English culture, and to respect people outside of the English culture. Multiculturalism should be the norm in Australia. And us adults need to stop blaming the children for not wanting to learn a language. Us adults need to stand up and say, we want our children to learn a language. We want our children to be able to communicate with others outside of the English culture and outside of Australia, to increase their job opportunities, to increase their connection with the world. Australia seems to be one of the very few countries in the world that holds on to this monocultural, racist ideology that we should only learn one language, and that language is English. I understand that Australia has an obsession with literacy and numeracy, as though that is the most important thing in education. But many Australians do not understand what literacy and numeracy actually mean. Literacy is not learning how to spell. Spelling is a very basic understanding of a language. To actually fully understand a language, you need to be able to apply your knowledge, not just recite letters. In order for West Australian students to fully develop their literacy, they need to understand how languages work. Not just English, not just spelling, but how languages work, how they are put together, how the syntactic patterns work, the semantics of words, the pragmatics of saying things in different contexts. And in order to do this, in order to fully understand how a language works, you need to learn another language, because then you can compare and contrast and think about different ways of saying things. And as for numeracy, many people think that learning the times tables and reciting index laws is numeracy. Well, it isn't. Numeracy is about understanding logic, understanding how systems work, understanding patterns and working out patterns, and learning another language and translating in particular between one system and another system actually really helps students to develop their pattern analysis and really helps with their numeracy. The other thing that some of my students say to me is, I'm never going to go to Indonesia, so there's no point in learning the language. Well, The purpose of learning the language, as I said at the beginning of this video, is to connect to other cultures. You don't need to go and visit Indonesia or the country of the language that you are learning in order for it to be useful. Because in Australia, that you are going to run into, you are going to work with, you are going to study with people from cultures other than English Australian culture. It is all about the skills that you develop while learning the subject. In English, you might learn how to write an essay, but it is very unlikely that you will ever write an essay in your real life. But the argumentative skills and the writing skills that you develop through learning how to write an essay are very useful to your future life. Similarly, it is very unlikely that you will ever need to develop an algebraic equation to work out the amount of fencing that you need to maximize the area of a pen for your 5 goats in real life. But again, it is the skills, the logic skills, the abstract reasoning skills that you develop through learning about algebraic equations which will be useful to your life in the future. Now, I highly doubt that anybody growing up in Western Australia would never meet somebody with a culture, with a background that is different from theirs. And that is why we need to learn languages in Western Australia in order to connect with, to communicate with, to understand and hopefully to respect people from cultures and backgrounds different from our own. Luckily, the West Australian government is showing leadership in this area. The School Curriculum and Standards Authority in Western Australia has just released a letter to every principal in Western Australia saying that in 2018 they are going to be rolling out mandatory language learning from years 3 to year 8. This means that every single student in every single school across Western Australia in years 3 to 8 will need to learn a language other than English. This is fantastic news because the Australian government has realised the importance of learning other languages besides English and how this increases the prospects, the job prospects, the life prospects for students in Western Australia. I grew up in Mandurah, Western Australia, and at school I didn't learn a language. But when I got to university, I took the opportunity to learn Indonesian. And through this, I travelled to Indonesia. And this opened up so many more opportunities for me in my life and in my career. And I believe passionately that we need to give students in schools in Western Australia these sorts of opportunities, because only then will Australia, the Australian nation, prosper. This is what other countries are doing. This is why other countries have mandatory language programs from a very young age. And we need to follow suit. And it is fantastic that the West Australian government is acting on this and making languages mandatory in every single school in Western Australia. And now it is time for schools, the administration in schools, the teachers in schools, the parents of students in schools to also show the leadership and actually value languages. And then the students will actually value learning a language as well, and they will stop asking their teachers, why the bloody hell are we learning a language? Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like it, share it, comment on it, and have a fantastic day.